the Between Two Lines podcast, talking about performance, life, and everything in between. Featuring your hosts, Johnny Stahl and Ash Hamilton.
Welcome to the Between Two Lines podcast, performance, life, and everything in between. Today we had the absolute privilege of sitting down with Laura Gould, a coach from Melbourne, Australia. Laura is the creator of Your Mindful Movement with a unique approach to training modalities to get individuals in their best shape while becoming more in tune with who they are as an individual. Laura shared some pretty incredible stories on this podcast, and I hope you enjoyed them as much as I did. Welcome, Laura.
Hi.
So usually like to, start off these things with a bit of little bit about you. So obviously I'm fortunate enough to know a little bit more, but give us a rundown. How would you describe what you do if someone was to ask?
Yeah. What do I do? So I'm a coach, so I'm a personal trainer, but I'd like to say that I am a little bit more than just a personal trainer, not just your average Joe in the gym, training people and trying to get as many hours under my belt as possible. I'm all about looking after yourself, mind and body. I'm working on mind-body connection, becoming aware of yourself, creating space in the body, and being able to utilize movement in a way that's going to not only help you with these external goals that you may have, like looking good, building muscle, losing weight, etc., but also to help enhance your mind and your mental state. So that's pretty much a summary of what I do now, and that's been sort of built up over the years. Yeah,
nice. It's whenever you talk about like all those things, it's kind of I light up because I'm like, yep. I could talk about all those and find it extremely interesting. And I think even from like how we started talking via Instagram and then we caught up and kind of got to know each other a little bit, it's always been so interesting, kind of like the similarities we've both experienced, but also kind of like the rabbit holes that you've kind of been exposed to, I guess in the last, would you say 2 years? Things have kind of changed, or was it last 12 months specifically?
I would actually say that this whole journey of me trying, expanding my view on movement probably started more like 5-ish years ago.
Yeah, wow.
And then it's developed, and it's just from little experiences that I've had with myself, just like when I started getting gut issues and like food reactions and things like that, and not looking after myself, using exercise more as like an escapism, and then learning from that. So it's not just a case of like in the last 2 years since I've like looked at more research and experimented more. It's been like a bit of an ongoing journey. For the last since I was like 25, 24.
Yeah, goodness. There's one story that I want you to talk about and elaborate a bit, because when you told me this was kind of like this rabbit hole, what you've been exposed to, this was kind of like when my ears kind of like switched on. I was like, all right, what is this? Why did it happen? All this type of stuff. And I call it like the ear piercing story. Give us a bit of a rundown about what happened with this whole, I guess, experience, and then kind of like how that has kind of like, I reckon it probably changed a lot of things after that.
Yes. So just to give you a bit of background, I've had a lot of kind of mental health issues since I was like a teenager. And there's just been a couple of stumbling blocks along the way. I'm now 31, and around like my early teens, mid-teens, and then like mid-20s, I've had different kind of experiences that have allowed me to grow. I wouldn't say they were crazy, intense, traumatic experiences. They've just helped me along in life. And when I was 25, I started getting, that was probably the last big event that really got me waking up to needing to change. And that was when I started reacting to foods, and I couldn't get to the bottom of my allergies. And I started reacting to yogurt. I started getting hives all over my face, and then I'd eat dark chocolate. I'd get a rash around my mouth. Just throat closing up from eating nuts. All of these random issues that started forming. And this was during a reasonably stressful period of my life. And from that, I did some investigating, and I figured out that I had something called histamine intolerance, which eventually developed into mast cell activation syndrome. So it's basically like the body starts attacking itself, just without going into the science of it, because I don't quite understand it. But after that, I realized that my nervous system is something that I really needed to look after, and I needed to look after my body as well. So cleaned up my diet, went on a low histamine diet, didn't really connect with movement, that what I was doing in the gym could be causing me aggravation as well and causing me stress. So like I said, this was during a very stressful period of my life. Now, your body reacts to any sort of stress, whether it's physical or mental, it kind of reacts in the same way. And it can't differentiate between whether you're actually causing it and you're doing something that you enjoy, but it's causing stress, compared to, you know, an external influence of like a breakup or whatever it might be. And I started getting niggles in my body, like random niggles on my left side, on top of all the allergies that were happening. And I was just carrying on training. I was, I was doing random training where it's like half training for a triathlon and half doing like CrossFit-y style stuff, like high intensity circuit stuff. I don't know. I was in my own little world, enjoying life. And I started getting niggles all on my left side, and it felt like it wasn't just injuries, or it was like imbalances forming, but it was like more neural, like my nervous system would just get blocked. And maybe it was impingements or whatever, but it just felt like it wasn't muscular, it wasn't skeletal, it was more neural. Like I'd be doing bench press and like my left side would just collapse, and it wasn't out of pain, it was just neural fatigue, but it was just weirdly happening all over my body. Anyway, so this was continuing to happen over my training experience, I guess, over like 3 or 4 years. And when I moved over to Australia, I was again in a stressful period, and these niggles just started getting worse and worse. Now, I had my nose pierced at the time, and I had 8 piercings in my ears, and I tried everything. I went to different PTs and physios and osteos, and none of them could really get to the bottom of it. They'd ease my pain for a little bit, and then it would just come back again. And I'd think, oh, okay, I've got something, this has helped me. And then it would just come back again. I just couldn't get to the bottom of it. And then I just started doing some research about Chinese medicine, and I saw that in some instances, people get specific piercings to help resolve like migraines and neural issues. So I thought, well, maybe my piercings are causing me issues. So I decided one night, I just took all of my ear piercings out. And then I went to sleep with a lot of neck and shoulder pain, and everything had tightened up on my left side. By the time I woke up, everything had eased, and I could move my shoulder in ways that I couldn't for a good 2 years, I think. And so that was crazy. And because I'd never heard of this happen in the other way around, like taking out the piercings, I was like, whoa, this is mad. I went to work and I was telling people, and I was like, wow, this is so crazy. And then my boss at the time, I was about to do a deadlift session. I still had my nose piercing in, and I was determined to keep it in because I loved it so much. And I was like, yeah, I've got a niggle in my lower back. And he was like, well, maybe you should take the nose piercing out and see what happens. And I was like, I just don't want to. But I did it anyway at the beginning of the session. And then I did. And then over the hour, my hips started releasing, and I could bend my legs in ways that I couldn't, again, for years. And I was like, whoa, this is mad. And then from that, obviously, that was just such a crazy experience. And potentially it's happened to a lot of people, but it's such a weird concept that I'd never thought would make such a massive difference, that I just went into a massive rabbit hole on the nervous system, because it looked like what was happening was you have a lot of nerve endings in your ears and in your nose. And clearly for me, the piercings were just aggravating those nerves, which would then obviously your nerves in your ears are connected to the rest of your body. And then that taught me how much everything is connected in the body, and we shouldn't compartmentalize. Everything has some sort of influence on another part of your body, whether it's like right near it or right, at the bottom of your legs. So yeah, that was my little piercing story.
Yeah, even like hearing it like for the second time, I'm just like sitting there being like, no way. Like it, as you said, it really does show that. And I love the quote by like Perry Nicholson. It's like, no system in the body works alone and no system in the body heals alone. And like, I think the more we kind of dive into this stuff, the more we realize it's like traditional approaches, they work until they don't. And like, I know for yourself, like your training, well, from the time I've known you, also I didn't know you prior to that, has changed dramatically to what I guess you would have categorized training in the past. And I think it's from Strong Fit was like the inspiration. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I've had some experiences since the piercing story. And when I started getting into this new way of training, it's all thanks to my coach at the time, Wim, who is based actually in Belgium. And he was part of the Strong Fit community at the time. And he kindly said that he would happily help me out to try and fix all these niggles and stuff. Because even though I'd taken the piercings out and I had a lot of relief, things weren't functioning the way they used to on my left side. I had some, I guess, muscle damage or decreased muscle size on my left side compared to my right side. And yeah, I was still moving somewhat dysfunctionally in a way that wasn't making my body happy. So he taught me the importance of holding tension correctly in the body, taking a step back and not being destructive in my training. Even though I thought it was constructive, it was being destructive. And then being more constructive and more mindful as I was moving. And he got me to think about things so differently to how I'd ever thought about training, that it's just completely like blown up into its own in its own direction. Because I come from a background of competitive swimming, of always needing to be faster, stronger. When I got into weightlifting, it was all about putting more weight on the bar. Your progress was based on the amount of weight you're squatting or, benching or whatever. In swimming, it's about going faster and harder. But I realized it's not about the number. It's about looking after yourself and becoming a better human, which will then lead you to becoming a better athlete. So me becoming more mindful in my training allowed me to overcome a lot of my niggles, a lot of my issues with movement, but also become more aware of myself and any issues that I had in my life outside of training. Got me to be a better human, but also improve in my movement strategies and the way that I was exercising. So yeah, since his work and learning from Strong Fit, because I did a Strong Fit course after that, they're based mainly on, they describe it as the nervous system is the oldest part of the body. And so everything has kind of been built around that, and it's connected to every system in the body as well. So look after your nervous system first, understand that and how it influences your body. And then from that, build on the performance, first starting with how the nervous system actually functions. And that's just totally, just pushed me in a completely different direction in my training and in how I train my clients now. And I've seen amazing results within myself as a human, as I don't want to call myself an athlete, but as like as an athlete, I guess, but I don't mean it quite like that because I'm not an athlete. And in my clients, in the way that they think and they move now.
I'm interested to know like what your definition of kind of like mindful around training is. Because like when I heard mindful, I'm like, is she meaning like intent, like going in there with a specific intent? Is she meaning being like more aware? Because like I'm kind of aware of the type of training you probably would have done at one point in your life where it would have probably been focused on like tempo. And I feel like for a lot of people that step into the gym, tempo and kind of like sensing things, people are horrible at. Like they don't know how to control something, and when you say, can you feel that working, they don't even know what they're meant to feel. Now, how is that type of, I guess, in my eyes, mindfulness, feeling the sensory and like, I guess the control of the tempo, different to this new type of like mindfulness around training that you're talking about?
Well, it's pretty much linked. And the mindfulness, whenever I've spoken about mindfulness in movement, I think people automatically think about things like yoga and like meditative slow movements. And sometimes I think if it wasn't for my Instagram account where I actually post myself lifting heavy weights, I think that's what people would think I actually focus on and do. And it's not that at all. I focus on the importance of weight training. I love weight training. I love conditioning work. I really, really push myself. But having that mindfulness aspect, it's all about awareness of what you're actually trying to feel and get out of that movement. Now, I could give you heavy hip thrusts to do, but if you're not feeling it in your glutes and you're focusing more on the weight that you're lifting and you're like, I just need to get 5 reps so I can, post it on Instagram and look how amazing I can, look how strong I am. But if you're not feeling it in your glutes, are you actually gaining anything in the long term from it? I see this so much, and it's no fault of anyone. I think it's just the world that we live in now. It's so externally focused rather than us folks being able to balance going inwards within ourselves versus going outwards. Like we're on Instagram, we're constantly working, we always have some sort of stimulation. Even when we train, we're listening to podcasts or we're listening to music. We're more concerned with, the weight on the bar. We've got our phones on us all the time. We need to balance that out with inwards work. So when you're training with me, I want you to focus on what is that exercise actually, what's the intention behind that exercise? Okay, we're doing hip thrusts, so we're going to work on engaging our glutes. Now, I'm not going to make you go heavy. I just want you to make your glutes scream, make them work. So by the end of that, 60 seconds, whatever weight is there doesn't matter. It's more about the input that you've been able to create yourself and create your own energy. So I guess that's kind of an example of how I focus my training now. So every single movement that I put in my training has got, I guess, 1, 2, 3 intentions behind it, and not losing sight of that and getting distracted. Now, I have to say, I used to be really bad at this, and I used to want to just push myself and not listen to what my coach would say at the time. I do have some examples about that, quite funny, interesting ones. And it didn't really get me anywhere. Well, did I tell you about the swimming experience?
No.
Ah, that's a good one, actually. It's similar to the piercing one. I actually find this one more amazing, and I still can't wrap my head around what actually happened than the piercing story. So, like I said, when I was from the age of 8 to 14, I was a competitive swimmer, and I would say I was pretty good. I went to the British Nationals, and that's the top tier.
It's not bad.
It's all right. Not as good as, the majority, I guess, of international swimmers or whatever. But you put in 2 hours a day of training. It's hard work. I had a sister. Still have a sister. She went to the Commonwealth Games. So the intensity of our training was pretty, it was pretty strong. And we, our dad was always there to push us. And when I ended up having to quit because I started getting I was just struggling mentally. I had a lot of panic attacks in the water. I had psychosis at the time. I had lots of issues going on, and there was almost a trauma that had formed there when I gave up. It was a story that didn't end right, that it should have ended
expectations.
more naturally, I think. Yeah. And I would come back and forth with swimming. I stopped it for ages. And then after university, or when I did my master's, I started getting back into it. And I didn't join a club or anything. I just trained by myself, and I would just train how I would normally train. So I'd like push myself a lot. Like looking back at the sets that I would do would be similar to what I did in club swimming, which was very intense because we were in quite a competitive swimming club. And so from the age of like, I'd say 21, 22, I was in and out of the pool training, I don't know, say 2-3 times a week, just for my own fun. And I did like a sprint triathlon at one stage, so I was training for that. But I started getting allergic reactions in the pool. So afterwards, I would come out and I would have sneezing fits. I would have crazy sneezing fits that would last the whole day, and I'd get crazy fatigue. Now, it's quite natural to, when you first start swimming, to get fatigue. Like you're in there for 10 minutes and you're like, oh my gosh, like I just need a nap straight afterwards because it's very tiring. But this was like constant, and my sneezing got really bad. And I just assumed that I was allergic to chlorine. Like I had all these other allergies going on. I was just like, oh, I guess I'm just allergic to chlorine. I'll just stick it out and keep pushing myself in the pool. Then I started training with Wim, the coach who was associated with StrongFit. And he was telling me that this was nothing to do with allergies. This was to do with my intentions behind my swimming was wrong. It wasn't wrong, but I didn't have the a kind of a positive intention for going into swimming. And I didn't really understand what he meant at the time, but he gave me some constraints. He said, look, I don't want you to stop swimming, but I want you to do 20 minutes maximum to start off with. You cannot go too slow to the point where you're bored, and you can't go too fast to the point where you're distracted and you're like, there's negative self-talk. You have to focus on creating internal tension. So this is something that StrongFit is big on, is different tensions related to different nervous states. Stay in internal tension as you're swimming. The first 2 weeks of me trying to stick to these rules was awful. I would go in for the first time and I'd smash like 45 minutes out and just push myself, and I'd be like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. Came out sneezing fit. It was just like a nightmare. I was sneezing again. I was like, oh, God damn it. Did it a couple more times and I was like, okay, I'll do 30 minutes, but I'll still just, I'll focus on internal tension, but I'll try and push myself because I couldn't help myself. Again, come out sneezing fits. Then I thought, okay, maybe I should just listen to what he said. So went in 20 minutes, internal tension, and came out, no sneezing. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like no sneezing whatsoever. Yet I've come from swimming training where I was sneezing for the whole day afterwards. And then I told him, and I was so excited about it. And I started getting more of a positive relationship with my swimming. And as I was doing that, I was also training and working on creating more internal tension in my body through like sandbag training and dumbbell, barbell training. And then there was this one swimming session where I couldn't find a specific muscle. And I was so determined to find it that in that session, I found it. And it was like, it was so switched on. I think it was my teres muscle and my pec that I was trying to find. And on my left side, I'd always struggled to find that. And in that swim, I really, really was able to activate it. And I totally lost track of time. I was so present in the moment that I think I did like 35 to 40 minutes of training. But I came out and I had like, it was like I'd done psychedelics or something. I was in some crazy euphoric state, no sneezing. And I came out and I was, for 3 days straight, I just remember sitting on my balcony, staring at the sky, just being so grateful for life and just thinking that the world is such a magical place.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell did that, what just happened? And some sort of trauma, I think, got released. I'm not quite sure what happened, but like I activated some muscles that hadn't been activated in a very long time. And I was so present in the moment. It was mad what had happened. And then ever since then, I have not sneezed at all in my swimming. Crazy.
That's insane. That's next level. And it's experiences like that that some people will be like, nah, that's full of shit. Like, there's no way that happened. And, the other people will be like, all right, find the research to prove that happened. And this is where, like, I honestly think that research is important, but it can't explain some things. And I think the more you appreciate the body's interrelated, that you're not going to find studies on these things. And
no, definitely.
It's making me want to dip back into the nervous system and kind of those things, because there's a few things you keep saying, and you've talked about obviously the nervous system, and you've talked about kind of like the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches of the autonomic system. And you brought up the internal talk, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this strong fit kind of like, I guess, mentality is that you've got like internal talk and external talk. And certain muscles are correlated to these different, I guess, internal, external talks. And I believe it's internal talks more associated with the parasympathetic nervous system, and external is more the sympathetic. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So they've, Julian, who is the founder of StrongFit, very, very intelligent man. He put together this muscle map of the two talk chains and how these different muscles connect to creating specific tensions in the body. So yeah, there's the internal talk chain, which is more of this chain is very important for, like, I guess you could call these the structural muscles that help control. And from my experience, I think that most people could do with more internal talk work, especially to start off with when they're becoming more mindful of their training. And then external talk, sympathetic, linked to the sympathetic nervous system, external talk for explosive, powerful movements. When I first started hearing about this, I remember I didn't quite understand it. I listened to it at first on a podcast, and this was when I was first starting to get into StrongFit style training. And I was like, I don't really understand this. And then when I started working with Wim, my coach at the time, he kind of explained it a little bit more thoroughly for me. And the more I started, I don't think this has been tested and in a controlled environment, but you just have to try it for yourself. And I was in such a, I guess, low phase in my training because I was just getting so many niggles everywhere, and I just wasn't solving any of my issues. I was like, there's no harm in me just trying this. I mean, this guy has offered to help me at no charge. He's just doing this out of the kindness of his own heart. I was like, I might as well listen to him. And the more I started practicing and experimenting, the more this actually made sense. And I started becoming more mindful of my mood after certain training sessions, more mindful of like how my injuries and like little niggles started feeling after I created more internal talk in my sessions. When I was feeling like I was stressed out about something and I just needed to release some tension, if I focused on more external talk movements, how much that actually relieved the stress that was in my body. Just connecting the dots, and it's, I guess, based on somewhat anecdotal evidence, but you have to experience yourself in order to be able to fully understand it and believe it. Because me just saying it, and even me, if there was a study out there, me giving you a study on it, I think it's all about just experiencing it yourself in order to fully grasp the power of the nervous system and how effective it can be in your life. And I think it would be great to have a study done on this, but all studies and experiments, they need to start up from somewhere, right? I mean, it's like studies weren't produced out of thin air based on other studies. Oh yeah, I mean, I know there's studies based on other studies, but like the initial one would have come from an idea of someone experimenting and playing around. So anecdotal evidence, us playing around with these things, is so powerful. And sometimes a controlled lab experiment isn't real life and can't prove necessarily what's happening in your body in real life.
Oh, absolutely. And I love how you say trial in it, because I remember initial days when we were kind of like back and forth with some of these ideas, because what you were talking about was kind of similar to like what I was getting exposed to. It was just a little bit different, but it's similar enough for me to be like, all right, what's this about? Because like, I think it doesn't matter from where you come from. If you're kind of focusing on the same stuff, it's like, all right, we could probably learn a bit from each other here and kind of like understand things. And I remember that you had the famous, infamous Sandbag Alley, and you used to walk up and down with with your sandbags, because that's a big part of that training you were doing, and still is. And you were like, Ash, you just got to try it yourself. Anyway, and I remember coming around and you showed me like the technique and stuff, and you're like, you have to do 400 meters, no stopping. And it's like, I was like, the competitive side came out. I'm like, that's it, 400 meters, easy as, let's do this type of thing. And I remember one of the things that you talked to me about was obviously finding this like internal like torque, which was kind of like, finding your obliques, finding your adductors, kind of like finding the inside of your foot type thing. And you said that your erectors or your back is going to scream if you're doing it wrong. And I remember like doing it at the start, I was like, take my hat off, like 400 meters is obviously not the shortest amount of time, like distance to go over. And at the start it was sweet because it wasn't that heavy. I don't know. It was like heavy enough, maybe 40, 50 kilos, I think it was.
It was about 40 kilos. Yeah, I think you had the grey bag. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like walking along and I was like, oh, sweet. And then I don't know what it was, but like my back just started screaming. And it was kind of like one of those pains where you're like, not sure about this, might have to stop here. But then I was like, nah, 400 meters, like if Laura can do it, I'm ticking this box. And it wasn't until, I guess you could say, I became more present. Like I was focusing on nasal breathing. I was focused on like feeling the right areas, that suddenly it's like my back switched off. And I suddenly was able to focus on these things and continue and complete the 400 meters. And it was extremely interesting for two reasons. The first one was, it's like, usually when you feel a lot of fatigue in a muscle, you need to stop, you need to rest. And then, obviously things come back to normal and you can go again. But like for it to go from like, it was screaming, my back is going to go type sensation, that was quite familiar, because in the past my back has gone, or whatever gone means, you kind of get what I mean, for it to go away. And the second thing is you talked about is that these internal torque is associated more with the parasympathetic nervous system. And afterwards, it's like, I was exhausted because it was something I hadn't done for a while. And like, I think if you've trained hard, everyone kind of knows that I feel exhausted feeling, but it was a very different feeling. It was like, I felt calm. I felt easy. Like we were talking, I remember you asked me questions, and like my head, like I was so calm that like, I just didn't even hear anything. Like it was that parasympathetic, like rest and digest feeling. And it was like, how do I feel like this when I've trained quite hard? Because we did some other stuff. And yeah, it really showed me, I'm like, oh shit, this stuff's like legit.
Yeah, the sandbag, the 400 meter sandbag carry is awesome. And this is something, going back to Julian, the founder of StrongFit, he did I think he said for like a good year at least, he did a 400 meter sandbag carry after every single training session. And my coach at the time, when he said, get a sandbag, this was at the start of lockdown. And I had a lot of mental battles in my head, because this was at the time when, I'm so glad this happened actually. We went into lockdown and I had no equipment whatsoever. I had no barbells or dumbbells. And I was like, training was my life. Like I loved it. And this was still during the period that it was somewhat of an escapism for me. And he was like, just get a sandbag and fill it up with sand and we can train with that. And I was like, oh, okay. I wasn't really digging it at the start. I was like, this is just so uncomfortable. Like barbell's so much easier. Anyway, I ended up getting the sandbag, and now it's like the main staple of my training. But one of the things he got me to do to start off with was to do a 400 meter sandbag carry, not necessarily after every training session, but every single day. And now there was a few concepts behind it. Firstly, to teach me internal tension, internal torque, to not stop going into my back. So he said, within that 400 meters, he said, if you go into your back, you have to do the 400 meters in as little drops as possible. So the aim is to not drop it at all for the 400 meters. And I mean, if you're just walking, it could take like 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes, depending on how heavy the bag is. Like it can take a while. And you think to yourself, like an athletics track, oh, it's not that long. But trust me, if you carry a heavy sandbag, it can take a long time. So yeah, so when I first started doing this, my back just kept screaming. I think the first carry that I did with the 40-kilo bag, I dropped it like 5 or 6 times. And I was like, oh my God, this is impossible. And then by the end of the period of me doing daily sandbags, I got to like 60 kilos. And I think I weighed about 64 kilos at the time. So I nearly got to body weight of doing absolutely no drops, 400 meters. But the main part was, it wasn't just getting the 400 meters done. It was not feeling it in my back. A lot of people, they train, like I said, like with the hip thrusts, they feel it in their back, but they're lifting the weights and they're like, yeah, that's cool. I did 160 kilos on hip thrust. Woohoo. But you felt it in your back. Like, what are you getting out of that? Whereas this 400-meter sandbag carry, because your back screams so much, you just don't want to go there. You really don't. It's so much frustration in your lower back. Like, it's so uncomfortable. But then when you get that smoothness of using your obliques, feeling the tension in your glute max, in your inner hamstring as you're walking, God, it's so powerful. And it's like you said, it is quite a calming effect. So after the 400 meters, you finish and you don't feel beat up. You don't feel destroyed. You feel like you've accomplished something. There was a win, but also like that's such a great ending to your session. Like you finished in internal talk on a win, feeling the right muscles, and it's very powerful. It's such a simple thing, but it's so powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And it's something I know I've said a few times too, because you're like, Ash, how's your sandbag going? And it's like, I've got the sandbag. I think it's in my cupboard, but it's like, it doesn't have any sand currently. But I'm curious, because obviously that was only one of, like, I think you showed me like 5 or 6 other kind of like different ways to perform movement. And one of the biggest things that was that intentional, that mindfulness that you've talked about. How is your training, I guess, because in the past, I think you've trained for physique and then you've obviously trained for performance as well. How is like this kind of like training that you're kind of doing now influenced your physique when you can kind of like get into the right muscles?
Yes, well, my main focus isn't my physique at the moment, but it's the side effect of training that your physique changes. And I've seen a lot of muscle growth. I think I've put on quite a bit of muscle since training with sandbags and training with more of an intention to actually feel specific muscles. My physique has also changed in how I hold myself, the confidence that I have in my body. Being like, when doing like lat pull downs or, you know, back exercises, not just doing them and focusing on the numbers, but actually finding the right muscles, has allowed me to improve my posture and how I stand and how I hold myself, which then automatically has like a mental effect as well. If you stand with more confidence, you feel more confident as well. So I'd say I've definitely been able to gain muscle mass, which I know a lot of women are scared of, but you shouldn't be scared of, because the stronger you get, the more powerful you feel and empowered you feel. So definitely don't ever fear gaining muscle. So I'd say, yeah, I've built more muscle and just holding myself so much better. And also in terms of physique, just my niggles have gone away and I'm more balanced from side to side, which was a big thing for me. But I try not to focus too much on what I look like and that effect of training. It's more for me, movement for me should be a part of your daily routine. It shouldn't be something that you go with the intention of destroying yourself just to, you know, feel like you've had a sweat on. It's something that you need to incorporate in your life, because energy creates energy. Moving your body will help you throughout the rest of your day. But also, if you utilize movement in the right way on a daily basis, it can affect your mindset and your outlook on life. You training really hard with intensity and with the right intentions is then going to, if you allow the opportunity to see that being reflected in the rest of your life can be extremely powerful, and you can see things happening in your daily life because of the training that you've been doing. So that is my main focus, is just getting people to think differently about training. I've been there, focusing too much on what I look like in the external environment, going inwards, dealing with traumatic things that potentially have happened in your life or things that are currently happening in your life, stressfulness in your job, with your family. Your training can actually have an impact on that if you allow it to, if you can see the opportunities there. So for me, the physique stuff is great. Like, it's awesome to look awesome. But the other stuff for me is more important.
Yeah. It's interesting how sometimes like for me, I know that the cycle of training was left school, insecure, wanted to get big. Then it's like you train hard, you look unreal. And then, usually issues arise, whether it's gut issues or something, niggles or something like that. And it kind of makes you step back and be like, whoa, what's this activity that I'm doing and why do I do it? And I think finding the love for training, again, can be quite difficult. And for a few people that have kind of like in similar situations where they've gone through this, what I call like in the industry cycle. I think if you've been in it long enough, you've kind of gone through your own little variation of it. And to be able to hear that, like someone like yourself that's kind of like gone through similar and like now finding a new reason for yourself to like be able to look at movement and then see how like all the skills, the adaptions, the everything that's associated with that training session and everything that comes outside of that, how it's having a flow and effect in your life.
Yeah.
And I know that, like, another thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I know, nervous system, psychology, all these things are interrelated. I know you have quite a bit of a passion. Where are you kind of at the moment in terms of your rabbit hole with like the whole emotions, the nervous system, and kind of integrating like the psychology, which I know you're passionate about, and this movement to kind of give like, I don't know how you would say it. I don't want to use holistic because I don't like that word, but it's like integrative. Yeah, let's go with integrative.
I guess when it comes to emotions and training and releasing things in the body, emotional mapping is how StrongFit like to call it. I've definitely taken on board what Julian has said in terms of like, it's a very sensitive topic to engage in with other people. With yourself, you can experiment with releasing trauma, and I think as long as you're prepared and ready for it, that's great. But if the person's not ready to deal with the trauma, whether they think they are or not, and you allow them to release something in their body, but they're not ready for it, it can do more harm than good. So it's like almost like a passion project on the side of my client training and my own training, that I'm learning more about it. And I find it extremely fascinating, but at the moment, I'm not interested in doing anything with clients on that. Like
it's more for yourself.
Yeah, it's more for myself. And like, I'm interested in the polyvagal theory, how like the nervous system is related to like how your different states, like different parasympathetic and sympathetic states, can have an effect on your body and your mental state, because I've been there when I've been extremely fatigued and I've been stuck in flight or freeze where I can't do anything with my body, and being able to try and scramble my way out of that, but with curiosity rather than fear. That's really helped me, and I found that fascinating. So I think it helps me to that emotional mapping does help me to actually understand other humans who I interact with more. So for instance, if I come into contact with someone who's extremely anxious and they can't see the woods for the trees, I can understand from what I've learned from the polyvagal theory is that they're in a specific state within their nervous system and they're stuck and they can't get out of it. And something like that I'm learning how potentially with training you can come out of those states. So I guess I'm more interested. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, is that like, would you, because I know some people use metrics like whether it's heart rate variability, like heart rate, blood pressure to kind of like influence training from like a metric standpoint. Is like where you're kind of thinking with this, that if you can pick up on maybe a certain type of emotional mapping, you're going to influence their training to then potentially get an indirect or direct outcome through that person? Is that like what you're saying, to help change the state?
Yeah. So for instance, something that I'm kind of following within StrongFit is different ways of training for if someone has anxiety or depression. So if they're in a more anxious state, doing things based on nasal breathing, constant tension, or like AMRAP style training is probably more effective for them to bring down their anxiety. But for someone who's more of a depressive individual, doing something to get them into fight, get them doing something of high intensity for a short period of time, like EMOM style training or sprint training, could be something very effective for them. So I find that super interesting, and that's something that I'm experimenting on with myself. So I'd say mid last year, I got extremely fatigued and I was stuck in freeze, and I couldn't find my fight. I couldn't find that sympathetic fight mode. And I was really struggling to do anything really. Like I could hardly lift a dumbbell. I was just so weak. And then I started slowly incorporating more EMOM style training, where I would like pick up a sandbag and do like one squat for 5 minutes, one squat every minute on the minute for 5 minutes. Then the next session I'd go in and I'd do 2 squats for every minute on the minute, and I'd grow and eventually do that, trying to find that fight in me to push further. But like, it's almost like exposure therapy, doing it very slowly. And from that, I was able to crawl myself out of that fatigue freeze state just through manipulating my training to help with that.
Yeah, wow. It's definitely a different approach to I guess personalized, individualized programming. And yeah, I think that I think that the future of like training, especially after like COVID, everyone to some degree is probably going to have to start picking up on some of these things, because as you said, like there's already so many variables and individuality of someone when it comes to running a program. But to be able to kind of like take in their current like state, whether it's mood or where they are in life, to be able to kind of adapt that and really change those variables is something that's pretty powerful. Because I know for myself, like that mood again can influence whether you want to train. And if you kind of like end up training and it's a bad experience, or you have aches and pains and stuff like that because of your mood, it just anchors that negative reinforcement, which can take away something that brings so much joy.
And I think it's important to, when you are training, to try and find a win every single session, however small it might be. So you finish on a win, you finish on knowing that you've been able to achieve something in your session, in order to then be able to push yourself in that next session, in the session after that. If you're constantly struggling and hurting yourself and not winning at all, you're not going to want to continue to do it, because you're not getting anything out of it. And I think it's very important to have those little wins or big wins, whether it's like as simple as, I found my left glute when I squatted, and I chased after that glute for like the whole squat set, and I found it, and I hadn't found it in ages. It's not necessarily about being able to lift, the 80 kilo sandbag or squat the 100 kilos on the squat rack. It's the little things where things inside your body feel really good, that you could come away with and feel empowered by, to make you want to go again and continue that journey, to continue to grow yourself.
Is that something that you kind of have like with your clients? It's like, whether it's like a check-in or like in person, like do you ask them, it's like, this week we're going to focus on like feeling that left glute, like typically in the past it's like, this week we're going to hit this number, Like, has your approach and how you interact with your clients changed much as a result of these experiences you're having?
Yeah, like I make set programs for my individual clients. They have like a 6-week program that we work through, and then we update it if and when. But there's specific reasons why I've put certain exercises in that program. And like, for instance, when we're doing windmills, I said to my client today, I said, try and find your teres muscle, like really try and find it. Give 3/4 of your mental capacity to that teres muscle on your left side or wherever it was. And she was like, she came out of it and she was like, oh, that really helped. Like, I felt it so much more. And I was like, that's a win. That's such a win. She found it. How awesome is that? And I'm actually writing a program. I'm creating a program at the moment that I can, that more people can get involved with rather than doing individual sessions with people. So they'll have like a weekly check-in with me, but they have a set program that I've made. And that program, honestly, looking at it, you'd think that's a really simple workout. Like, people would probably look at it initially and think, I don't see how I'm going to gain anything out of it, but that's not the point. It's not about the complication of the exercises. It's about your intention going into it. When you're doing that glute bridge for 60 seconds, you're not focusing on trying to lift more weight. You're trying to find your glutes and make them scream for 60. Like, you can create as much tension in your body as you want to, whether you have a weight on you or not. And then when they come out of that, my intention is obviously to have this check-in with them and say to them, like, ask them, did you find the muscles? If they didn't, then we look at trying to change things up a little bit, shortening the range, changing, you know, the position of the joints and see whether that helps or whatever. And just making them think about these specific movements without that external influence, rather go with the intention of going internal, which I feel like has been extremely powerful for my clients. And I feel like they've changed quite a lot since we've worked together on this. And they look at training completely differently. Because I get clients that come to me from like a background of F45 or, you know, just much more intense, I'm going to say destructive training, but it's not always destructive, but it's more intense training where mindfulness and awareness isn't really involved so much. And then when I train them at the start, they're like, this is different. Like, am I going to be able to see any progress from this? And then when we continue and I plant little seeds, I don't want to overwhelm people. I plant little seeds. I get them to start thinking about movement differently. Everything starts changing. And it's not just changing in their training, it's changing in life, because they become more aware of their body. There's like an hour of intense thinking as well as moving. And it's like mindfulness training. It's like doing your meditation for an hour, and then you go into your daily life and you can take the opportunity to actually change things in your daily life as well.
No, that's awesome. That's definitely awesome. And like, I just love how you appreciate all those different systems, and you even like integrating like that whole like mindfulness idea into the training and seeing it as like, because I know for some people, the idea of traditional, you know, meditation sitting there is something that they don't enjoy. And I know that gym's their thing, but I know that for a lot of those people is also, whether they know it or whether they don't, they're probably not doing it from constructive benefiting themselves. It's their outlet, and it's a destructive pattern for them, but it's also a form of a release. And I think that if people were able to become more aware of this type of training and bring it into something that they already love, I think they would have that different outcome outside of the gym in the rest of their lives that you keep talking about, which is again, them, where it's like, it's not just a physical change, it's that mental change. And that's pretty special to start incorporating that, and it's only going to get better as a coach. Awesome. Yeah. So like, Laura, those that are like listening, like, where's the best place to kind of like learn more about you? You talked about this program. Where's that going to kind of be released? How can people kind of like find out more about this, I guess, different approach to training that you've been exposed to?
Yeah, so I've got a website, yourmindfulmovement.com. I'm most active on Instagram. I get DMs on there and speak to people on there, and that's where I post a lot of my content. I did recently download TikTok, unfortunately. I got it purely for business reasons. Yeah, so I will be on TikTok as well, just posting things if people are interested. Your Mindful Movement on there. But yeah, you can just contact me on Instagram. It's probably the easiest, or through my website as well. The program is, I've pretty much finished it up. It's going to be a 12-week program with the intention. It's called Calm Through Movement, and this is going to be mainly focused on teaching people internal talk, and then being able to balance out the arch of being too sympathetic with being more parasympathetic, but in using weight training rather than meditation or yoga, etc. And then the intention is to do a 12-week program after that, which will be called, at the moment, it's called I can't remember what I called it now. something resilience.
Yeah.
It's still in the works. Anyway, so I've still got a couple more videos to make for the 12-week program, the initial one, and that will be released, I'm hoping, next week. So people can grab that off me. Yeah, so they'll get a full 12 weeks of training on top of a 30-minute check-in with me per week for the 12 weeks. And they get not only a workout, 3 days a week workout, they also get a lifestyle activity to do to become more mindful of their movement in everyday life, as well as nasal breathing exercises to do as well.
Awesome. Sweet as. Well, thanks heaps for coming on, Laura. It's always interesting hearing what you've been up to and kind of like the rabbit hole and the different approaches you've gone down with your training. So thanks heaps.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I feel like I rambled on, and I really hope this makes sense to your listeners. And I apologize if you had no idea what I was talking about.
You did good. Sweet. All righty. Till next time.
The Between Two Lines podcast, talking about performance, life, and everything in between. Featuring your hosts, Johnny Stahl and Ash Hamilton.